In March 2015, New Zealand's parliament mourned the death of a politician. Lawmakers from the government and 5 of the biggest opposition parties spoke for 15 minutes. But the politician wasn't from New Zealand, nor had he ever lived in New Zealand. The New Zealand Parliament, along with the parliaments of Australia and many other countries, was mourning the death of Singapore's founding father Lee Kuan Yew. Here's what one lawmaker said.
When I had dinner with Lee Kuan Yew at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2008, I explained to the then mentor minister that my mother was a great admirer of his. And he looked at me somewhat quizzically and said, why would that be the case? And I explained that in 1977, as a student, having gone 6 years without a haircut, passing through Singapore, I was given my first haircut by the customs officials at the airport as the price of entry. And my mother congratulated him on achieving something that nobody else had been able to do for years before that time.
Lee Kuan Yew has simultaneously been a tremendous force for good while holding some of the most tragic views a politician can ever have. Perhaps more than any other person who has ever lived, he fits the description of a benevolent dictator, a leader who uses enormous amounts of power for what they believe will improve their country. Here's how Lee used his power to solve problems at one of Singapore's most famous private companies, Singapore Airlines.
I can tell you that when I met the SIA pilots, I didn't meet them on TV, I met them face to face. So 5 feet across the table so they can see me and see whether I'm still vigorous, able to campaign and take them on, whether it's worth taking me on. And I offered them 2 choices. Either you argue, you stop this intimidation, which is what it was, bringing SIA right down, disrupting services, ruining its reputation, millions of dollars worth of advertisements and sales ruined within a matter of 2 weeks. I gave them a choice. Continue this, and I will, by every means at my disposal, teach you and get the people of Singapore, help me teach you a lesson you won't forget. And I'm prepared to start all over again. Or stop it. Get back to work, restore discipline, then argue your case. Took them 65 minutes. And they decided, okay, it isn't worth the fight. Why? Because they know they'll lose. They know that I'm prepared to ground the airline. They know that I can get the airline going again without them. And let there be no mistakes about this. Whoever governs Singapore must have that iron in him, or give it up. This is not a game of cards. This is your life and mine. I've spent a whole lifetime building this. And as long as I'm in charge, nobody's going to knock it down.
In other countries, governments also speak with airlines after massive service disruptions. However, airlines are rarely as scared of their government as Singapore's. Perhaps the biggest question on Singaporeans' mind was, why did the pilots take 65 minutes to give up? To which a witty commenter said, the pilots took 1 minute to decide to give up. It took them 64 minutes to decide who is going to tell Mr. Lee. Throughout Lee's 31-year tenure as Prime Minister, the strong arm of the Singapore government moved continuously. To give 3 examples, a large-scale resettlement and housing initiative resulted in 80% of Singaporeans owning their own homes when Lee stepped down. To prevent segregation, the government implemented maximum quotas for each ethnicity in housing estates. English became the main language of instruction in schools. But perhaps the clearest example of Lee's benevolent dictatorship was a misguided policy that Lee thought would improve Singapore even though it cost him dearly: the Graduate Mother Scheme. Lee believed that educated families would produce more intelligent offspring than less educated families. In the 1980s, the government gave priority in education and housing to families with educated mothers, while women who had not completed secondary school were encouraged to get sterilized. When we talk about the wrong policies of dictators, we are usually talking about actions taken for their own benefit. However, Lee personally had nothing to gain from this policy. In fact, Lee not only lost the support of several of his closest government ministers, but suffered the biggest ever swing at the next general election: 12 percentage points of the popular vote. But even some who were strongly opposed to the policy thought that Lee had good intentions.
One of the policies which is most controversial in my mind was graduate mother policy. My wife and I are graduates. We would have benefited from it, but we were opposed to it. But I saw the logic of what he was trying to do. He wanted greater talent for this place. But I thought where he didn't get it right was he didn't see that this would divide a people that he was trying to unite.
Absolutely.
But eventually he saw it and he gave in.
Lee has often been criticized for cracking down on political opposition, especially for detaining people without trial. Here's what one detainee said: "I was then put into a windowless room of about 4 or 5 square meters with just a concrete bench. I led a solitary existence with no sense of day or night, or of time passing. Thankfully, he was only there for 2 months."
When you're detained as a detainee, you're told you can be here for life.
What did he think of his experience?
Up to this day, I'll say openly that I don't think I deserve to be detained, and I do not think I was a communist, etc. But I do not blame the government of the day.
Ho elaborated in a book. He honestly believed that I was a threat to Singapore, for whatever reasons. I do not believe he detained me for his own personal gain, because he was corrupt and I was going to expose him. He detained me because he thought he had to do it. Corruption was below him. Only lesser mortals would be corrupt. He never cared about material things. He wanted power, and he had almost absolute power, but lesser mortals would want absolute power to create wealth. He wanted absolute power to create the Singapore that he wanted to create. Lee was politically astute.
I think trying to make a country out of Afghanistan is a distraction. There was no country for the last 30, 40 years. They've just been fighting each other since the last king was chased out.
Right.
How on earth are you going to put these little bits together? It's not possible.
He was also economically brilliant, implementing industrialization policies that raised Singapore's GDP per capita by 27 times in 31 years. But his views on some social issues were controversial, if not outright incorrect. In 2011, Lee ignited an uproar when he commented about the ability of certain religions to integrate in modern Singapore. After enormous pushback from both citizens and government leaders, Lee retracted his remarks. Many Singaporeans fondly remember Lee as a founding father rather than a dictator, even if some men would have preferred long hair when growing up. After all, he engineered a growth miracle and was far less ruthless than Hitler or Stalin, who massacred political opposition and abolished elections. Yet if Lee had always got his way, his rule would have been remembered very differently. Therefore, when we look back at Lee Kuan Yew's tenure, the most important question is not whether he did more good or more bad, for his rule has long passed. Rather, like those who campaign against Lee's controversial actions, we ought to ask ourselves, what can we do as citizens to make sure power is used for good Thanks for watching this video.